An incredibly helpful resource is Unreal Slackers, a Discord community for Unreal Engine users. You can get to it by going to unrealslackers.org. This will give you access to the server. Unreal Slackers is frequented by many of the top community members in the Unreal Engine community, as well as programmers, artists, and designers from Epic Games itself. Once you get onto the Unreal Slackers server, you will find that it is a thriving community of Unreal Engine users from all over the world. I strongly encourage you to check out the guide. Here you will find direct access to all the different channels and boards. Here you will find a general section which gives you access to career chats, industry chats, design chats, events, marketplace, source control, packaging, streaming, and so forth. You can also have areas to share your work, works in progress, release, content creation for graphics, animation, audio, architectural visualization, cinematics, level design, paper 2D, visualization and effects, as well as programming sections for blueprints, C++, multiplayer, physics, AI, engine source, editor scripting, plugins, gameplay abilities and plugins, as well as UI, UMG Slate, platforms, including Linux, mobile, web, AR, and VR, as well as job boards, those people looking for talent and those people looking for work. I also encourage you to take a look at the news section. Here you'll find links to our release notes, community links, as well as information from our marketplace, and various pieces of information that could be helpful on a day-to-day basis. Make sure you take full advantage of Unreal Slackers. This is a great place to come and join the community, and make sure you participate, share, learn, and take full advantage of this great community. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's weekend, not even weekend, it's this Friday. It's this Friday's Education Livestream, and today we are meeting with our guest, which is Patrick Wambold, and today we're talking about real-time motion graphics inside of Unreal Engine, which is a really exciting topic because, as you know, Unreal Engine can do everything. It does all the things. And we're really excited to have Patrick. He is a solutions specialist and a technical account manager. And he focuses on a lot of things. But one of the things he focuses on is motion graphics and broadcast graphics. And I think you also focus on live events and a variety of other things. So we'll meet Patrick in a moment. But of course, I always want to welcome Tom Shannon and Mark Flanagan.
Hello,
Mark
everybody.
is joining us
Hi,
as
Mark here.
usual from London, the other side of the pond, as it were. And Tom is joining us as usual from currently here in North Carolina, but maybe soon he'll be joining us from somewhere else. Maybe he can tell us about that someday. Stay tuned. Patrick, say hello to everyone and introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into this exciting topic that we're going to talk about today.
Sure. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. So as you kind of mentioned, I recently did change titles from technical account manager to solutions architect. Still focusing mostly in live events, broadcast, and then some in-camera VFX type work as well. Prior to being here, I joined in November. I spent about 15 years or so running my own company, doing mostly concerts, corporate television, these kinds of things. So motion graphics is something we spend an inordinate amount of time doing, and it's actually what brought me to game engines in the first place. So it was always kind of I think back then After Effects was kind of the gold standard for everything, and pretty soon you got to a point where you're like, I need this to be faster. So you kind of start exploring, you start using Nuke, you start trying to venture into these types of things, and it's like there's still it needs to be real time. And so that's kind of what actually brought me to Unreal in the first place, was this quest for no render times. We don't want to be sitting here waiting for farms to finish overnight when you have live television production hanging in the balance, so to speak.
Right. And you were doing this, you were doing all kinds of events in the Florida area, and then you ended up kind of traveling around.
Yeah, I mean, I was based in Miami, but most of my work was actually traveling. So I'd be in LA probably once a month. I'd be, all over the world basically. So it was, it's definitely an exciting industry to be in, and I think honestly, just game engines are really starting to kind of show their teeth there. As far as whether it's LED walls, whether it's XR, but still also a lot of this stuff is still content. Eventually, like a lot of it's still done linearly, 2D. 2D render. It's 3D when it's created, but it's rendered out and then it'll be played back in some
Right.
other fashion. So it's
Right.
still a huge part of the industry, and it's something that's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of come on this, was to make sure that people know, like, hey, like this is still like a high demand like area, and if people are able to deliver these products or these solutions faster and with better quality, it's kind of a win-win. So
Yeah,
definitely one.
absolutely. And one of the reasons that we wanted Patrick to come on the stream is because we visit, as you guys know, on the stream that regularly attend the stream. We visit lots of academic institutions, and there are a great many motion graphics, motion media type programs in universities. I taught at a university that had, hundreds of students that were majoring in motion media design, motion graphics design. And, one of our goals with this stream is for those people in that space not to be the last people to know what's going on and how things are changing,
Yeah.
particularly with tools and software, and mostly what people are doing out in the field. These
Mhm.
boutique shops, big shops, ESPN, Turner, these enormous shops that hire hundreds of designers, artists, technicians, because one of the reasons that Epic brought you in, and that the other people that work at Epic that are focused in this space,
Mhm.
you guys are talking to these huge shops and the small shops and everyone
Yeah.
on a regular basis. But you're not only talking to them, you're talking to other software vendors. And I think one of the things
Yep.
we're going to talk about are some of the the other big players in the motion graphic, motion media space. Whether it's Cinema 4D, whether it's some of the other ones that you're going to talk about later, that we're working very closely with, because
Yep.
everything is moving towards real time. I know that there's some big players in this particular industry. There's of course After Effects, there's Cinema 4D, and there's some others, and we're working very closely with a lot of them. As a matter of fact, some of you know that there's a thing called Epic Mega Grants, and Epic Mega Grants is helping to sort of lubricate the relationship of real time with some of these companies, because I think that everyone's sort of embracing real time, and maybe you can share some of your thoughts about that right now, because that's an
Yeah,
important thing.
absolutely. Yeah, and I was really happy to see that we just awarded that mega grant to Maxon, Red Giant, and but I mean, we give them out to a lot of companies, and some people have asked me like, well, does Maxon really need money? And of course not, right? Like they're not like going broke. They don't need cash from us or anything. But at the same time, it's more just kind of like, hey, this says this is more of a statement that we want to work more closely with them, and we want to make sure that anything they're doing, they're making it works with our stuff. And so I think that's been fairly evident with our emphasis on getting Datasmith importer correct for cinema files, like the same the same expectation that you would have for any other thing. But it just seems that, especially in this kind of sector, like there are some certain tools that seem to come up more often, and Cinema 4D is one of them. After Effects usually with some sort of element 3, like add on to it is another, and then there's like a handful of other things that you'll see, but those are like, I'd say, the main two. But CinemaCon is an interesting kind of just thing that I've come across, that like most people don't use the default renderer, right? They all
Hmm.
use an Redshift, some kind of X or V-Ray, whatever it happens to be. But that's kind of where I feel like Unreal kind of fills that gap nicely, because instead of having to queue it up in one of these things and do a render farm, if you get over and start working in real time, you'll get the same or comparable result like infinitely faster. Like you can't even describe it. Like it's not like an order of like, oh, it's like hours versus minutes. No, it's real time. So and sometimes that, I think, is just a monumental shift for people, because it's one thing to work in wireframe and see, but then when
Right.
you actually see it in like almost final quality all the time, you're like, oh wow, why wouldn't I want to do this?
Exactly.
And
Right.
so I think that it closes a lot of the loops, especially when you're working with users and things, and you have a tight time frame. You're like, here's what it's going to look like, and you scrub, and you're not waiting for like RAM preview for 20 minutes or whatever it happens to be.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, I remember. I freelanced, for years and years in the late '90s and early 2000s, and one of the places I freelanced was the NBA when I was in
oh,
New
okay.
York
Very
and
cool.
in the New York area, and I remember that I was there doing a bunch of broadcast graphics in 3D Studio Max, right? And they had uh, we were building graphics, we were building, stuff in Max, and then feeding it to these super specialized guys that were the only ones allowed to touch these machines that would create, these real-time
Yeah.
graphics that were super primitive 2D graphics. And basically they would take our 3D, turn it into 2D, and then
Yep.
put it into these machines. But these machines cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in order
Yeah.
to create real-time frames that would go to broadcast for the NBA.
Yeah,
But you had
and
to
a lot of
be
that truthfully still exists, and that's the thing that we're seeing. Like, again, it's not like as primitive as it once was, but I mean, there's huge, VizRT, Ross, Chiron, all these guys, like they have these real-time graphics engines. It's really what they were. They were essentially like a game engine, but that was always kind of part of the challenge, I think, with any of these systems is, somebody would bring you like an After Effects or whatever. Maybe it's even just like a mock-up of what this thing should do. And then you actually essentially had to take that same thing and attempt to recreate it as identically as possible and rig it in a way that you could play it back in real time. And there's always like a bit of a, I hate to say like loss, like it's not a loss of quality per se, but a loss of flexibility and a loss of time because you're just recreating something. Yeah. And so you're like, there's always this thing of like, okay, like I can't do it exactly that way anymore. But now that a lot of these, companies are working with us as well, like all of those companies I mentioned have their own Unreal integration also. What you design in Unreal is like literally what's going to play back. So there's not this like, oh, well, we have to re-rig this scene, recreate it, redo all these things. Like it's definitely becoming a thing. But even in those situations where it's not, and you're just rendering it out, like it's just unbelievably fast to be able to render out. And even if you just crank the settings in Unreal, it's still going to be like orders of magnitude faster than if you were to do it in a
I just
and it's on
realized
one machine.
So. There's going to be a whole generation that grows up that never experiences render time.
Right.
That would be amazing. I mean,
they're not going to understand us old folks talking about these multi-day renders for a single frame. They're going to be like,
no,
and like you said, it's not even orders of magnitude. You're talking, Lewis talked about, multi-day frames on some projects you've worked on. And even if you're rendering at 1/30th of a fucking millions and millions of times faster, it's not even like a comparison at that point. I broke down the math once and I was like, is that right? That number, I don't even know how to read all those
somebody
zeros.
showed me like something like that once where they were like, okay, even if we got like in one of these traditional like kind of path tracing type renders, like even if we were able to like quadruple, like or assuming like we use Moore's law, right, and we're able to every so often like that doesn't approach real time until like we're all dead by a long shot, like by a long shot. And it's like, okay, so knowing that, right, if you take that logic where you're like, okay, even if we cut it in half and it was like, we go from 8 hours to 4 to 2 to 1 1 to 30, it's like, or we could just jump straight to 60 FPS. Which would you rather do? And I was like, I'll take that one. So that was really what kind of brought me here.
I think not only that, it's going to be people will look at us and think we were crazy for doing it. One of my friends is a photographer and actually brought a film camera to a wedding and had a young kid come up to him saying, "Can I see the photos?" And he had to explain, well, I've got to take out this plastic roll from this thing and I've got to put it in some chemicals and then I'm going to shine a light through. And the kid was looking saying,
they're gonna like report this guy. They're like, I don't know, that's weird. I've never seen that before.
There's a real chance at any point I could fail and just ruin the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to like kind of think I'm like dating myself in that way, but it's the one thing I will say about these other more traditional systems is like they do kind of have this one nice thing I will say in this that you can kind of buy your way into more right? And I think that's where a lot of times people kind of don't necessarily understand the switch to working in a real-time scenario. They're like, wait, you mean I can't just buy more farms and like get more out of it? You're like, not exactly. You can to a certain extent.
Sure.
However, but the way I like to think of it more is like, yeah, you just invest a little more time in your artistry and your training, and you'll get a better benefit because it's not obsolete in 4 years, right?
I think that's really important, and I discuss that a lot with folks who are coming from rendering backgrounds, that you're going to get rid of rendering, but you're going to have to spend, like you said, more time on the production a little bit. There's still a little bit more overhead to setting things up. You're going to need someone with more technical skills if you want activity, etc. But at the same time, that's going to open up so many possibilities that it's well worth it. Also, that increased time, I think, is more fun and engaging because it's real time, and it's not people just like twiddling their thumbs waiting for buckets.
Yeah, no, exactly, and I think it removes a lot of guesswork. It's like I've gotten really good in my life of what I would call precision guesswork, right? Where you're like, all right, here's 5 frames of what this is going to look like, and you're just going to have to trust me that the whole minute's going to be correct. And instead, it's like, hey, you just scrub through the timeline, right, and just show them like at that point. And I think that especially in COVID times, like being able to do this and do this effectively, and also depending on what the skill level is of the team you're working with, you could actually work in multi-user collaboration on the same project in multiple locations, which is something that you really can't do in many other packages.
That's amazing. Yeah,
it's something that we don't necessarily like. I think cover in great detail just because there's so much more to VPNs and working remotely than than I have the knowledge for. But with some of the companies we've worked with, especially now, like it's pretty incredible because then you can have several people just looking at it. You just scrub across, and the days of, oh, it's got to render overnight and load up an RV, and then we all kind of do this, and then we kind of finalize it. Like those days are kind of going away in certain cases, right? Not all across the board, but certain cases.
But you have to hire a technician. There's someone that needs to know kind of how to do that, and so that but like you said, the trade-off is so obvious. Where like you get all of this, but it's going to cost a little more on this end. The trade-off is almost a brainer almost all the time, but that's, I think, where that opportunity is kind of holes that are opening up that don't fit into what used to be.
Like if you know these things, like you are extremely valuable because and I think about this sometimes when I am talking about this topic, especially because a lot of people like to kind of want to use this new tool to do the same old thing, right? And you're like, well, if we just do the same thing we've always done, you're kind of gonna get the same thing you always had, right? And so sometimes you do have to like tweak your thinking a little bit, and it's like, all right, but we're just going to try and composite 2D video slightly faster. You will get some benefit from Unreal, but you will definitely not get the most benefit out of it as if you like kind of swap your thinking a little and like, okay, how would I do this if I was like doing it for a game, something that does run in real time, and just switching that thought just a little bit. Like I'm not saying you trash everything you ever learned, but the more you can kind of tweak that thought process, like you'll get a much better return, I think, on it than because there's a reason why 2D compositors work the way they do. And there's a reason why game engines run at 60 FPS. And so if you kind of play to the strengths, you're going to get better results. And so hopefully we'll be able to chat about some of that.
Yeah. Well, let's dig into it a little bit deeper. For people that maybe aren't as familiar with Unreal Engine as they could be, Unreal Engine's a huge marketplace of real time. So, what are the specific technologies that made things like motion graphics and motion media a reality in Unreal Engine? In specifics, right? We have things like sequencer, right? And what did sequencer bring to a game engine, right? It brought linearity and the ability to have a timeline, to be able to keyframe things. But sequencer brought something else. It brought the cinematic camera, which I'm sure is a real critical element to being able to produce, very cinematic type experiences or broadcast type experiences, because they're very similar and they share a lot of the same types of experiences that you want to deliver to the audience. I think something else that you're going to share with us is it brought the media framework, and it brought the media framework to a whole different level, right? And so, and right now I'm tossing out words, but I think Patrick in a few minutes is going to dig deeper into some of these things. Tell us some of the other specific technologies that makes motion graphics, motion media, a reality, and a real viable tool set. And if you're either an educator or a student, and you're looking at Unreal and you're like, well, I don't want to make games, or I don't even want to make architectural visualizations, and I don't even want to design cars, but I do want to make motion graphics.
Yeah.
What specific tools? Because you can't approach the whole thing and say, I got to learn all of Unreal Engine. I just need to learn these 5, 7, 8 things in Unreal. What are they? Tell the folks.
No, and that's a really good question, a really good point, because I feel like game dev people are somewhat similar in reverse, right? I'm like, hey man, we can pay you a ton of money if you want to come learn how to do this other stuff, and they're like, nah, it's okay. I want to make games, right? And so I feel like there's kind of the reverse side from creatives. So like, I don't care about multiplayer. Like, I just want to do this faster, right? And so, but yeah, you touched on some of the main ones. I think the only other one that I would really add if I was kind of trying to round that list out now is like the render queue. And this is something that was new in 4.5, and in 4.6 is going to get an even better makeover, because at the end of the day, most of the stuff in motion graphics is still going to get rendered out to playback someplace else, whether it's straight web or it's coming from a server, television, or whatever it happens to be. So that kind of combination of sequencer, media framework, and then render queue is pretty much the bare basics of what you would need. But really, I think some of the things to always kind of look at if I was brand new and I'm looking at this, and this is what I recommend to everybody, is like, don't skip the basics on materials and lighting. At the end of the day, that is pretty much everything. Like, if you download a scene from the marketplace or from TurboSquid or any of these other things, and you load it up, you're going to be extremely disappointed that it doesn't look the way that it showed in the thumbnail. And the reason is it's not lit, and the materials maybe are not the same, right? And so if you can kind of, I hate to say master, but like at least understand those topics, you'll get a much better like bang for your buck out of some of this stuff, because at the end of the day, that's what a lot of this is. Like, I think everybody's got some familiarity with like a 3D program, and so it's like, all right, if you can do that and bring it in here and just kind of learn how the material set works inside Unreal, your stuff will look way better.
We talk about this a lot. I know that we do, Mark and Tom and I, is that we encourage people to understand the concept of being physically based, right? And because our materials are physically based, our cameras are physically based, our lights are physically based. And so what does that mean? Those are interesting words to say to somebody, but they're like, so what do you mean I bring a camera into Unreal? What
kind
it means,
of, right? You can copy the settings now.
And what it means is that you should study real camera, and you should understand real lighting, and you should understand what, the real properties of world physical materials are, because they all apply to Unreal Engine. And so in the old days, right, you used to have to fake shadows and you used to have to fake lighting in your materials, but that's not the case anymore. And the more you understand about real, albedo values and what roughness and perturbed surfaces are like, then you can approximate them in a physically based engine. And if you understand cameras and lenses and aperture settings and film back and lens kits in real cameras, you're going to be able to set those in Unreal cameras, and they're going to look like they do in a real world camera, right? And so you bring all that. And so, if you're studying these things, or if you're teaching them in an academic setting, then you have to make sure that you are bringing those real principles into teaching real time in Unreal, and they're going to pay off, because if you set them, they will look right? And so I think that's a huge aspect of teaching
the materials, for sure. And this is one thing, especially I think in motion graphics, that is worth mentioning, is that like, I don't know about an R23, so I apologize to anybody who's a Maxon guru, but like prior to this, there was not like a default PBR material in cinema, right? You had to do some kind of magic, or most people would just forget it, I'm going to use Arnold Redshift V-Ray, and that will be my physically based rendering setup. So kind of going from that, where you didn't have it, into Unreal, where it's by default, there's not even really a way to not use it unless you just use purely unlit materials. It is like, it's a game changer, because honestly, it's so much easier. I feel like, when you just like, you're like, look, all I really need is like this and a couple of like roughness and metallic values and a normal map maybe, and it's good to go. Like, I don't need to touch it. I don't need to go in and like draw in the occlusion around the edges of things. Like, it's going to be there, and that is super powerful and super freeing. But at the same time, like if you are coming from specifically like cinema or really any of these things, one of the easiest ways to kind of get around this in the beginning is to use something like substance materials, because these will translate across pretty much every application and give you, I can't say an identical result, but it's pretty darn close. Like if you look at it in one DCC versus Unreal versus like Substance Painter, it's going to be pretty close. And so if you're trying to get like a rough estimate and you don't want to waste a lot of time, like authoring the materials twice, throw some substance materials on it. If that looks good, great, kind of go from there. But I encourage people to, like, when they're kind of making this transition or starting to use Unreal, to definitely work on the materials and work on the lighting, the engine. Like, you're kind of going to drive yourself crazy if you light it and make it perfect in your DCC and then try and recreate that, like, because ultimately, like, they are slightly different. But I think that, like for me, like I don't even throw material on it at all in my DCC unless it's just for like an ID map, really. Like I'll group it by colors and like that's about it. Cause like I know that when I get over in, like, first of all, it's going to look beautiful in the viewport. So I'm already going to be happier about my result. Like it just looks better to start with, but I'm just going to use the materials there because that's ultimately where my final product is going to come from.
Right. Yep. I think one part of the PBR formula is actually the cameras. And cameras in the real world are actually real time. So it's a great way of learning things actually with a real camera. And that will hopefully translate between everything else as well, because every DCC is trying to emulate that as close as possibly. So I always advise students, get a real camera, not just a phone, but get a camera, learn some lenses, know how to use the actual settings. Don't just rely on automatic settings.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like I mean, this is honestly one area where I'm a little bit weaker. Truthfully, just because like cinema cameras and like versus like television, it is fairly different. They actually use like bubbling, like, because in most TV, like we're just like, nope, we set our irises and like we got an even lighting across the whole stage, we're good to go. It doesn't matter, But like actually learning like what ISOs are, focal length, like what these things do. Will help a lot. Like, and again, we kind of hide a lot of these things. Like, you don't have to learn it. You can just use like the FOV numbers and like others and exposure and just kind of tweak it in. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you do know these things, it's just gonna make it that much easier. You won't have to guess like, how do I get this shallow depth of field I want? You'll kind of right, and that's always gonna speed things up.
And one of the other things that I think, and for those of you who don't know, what was in July, we did Unreal Fest Online, and Patrick did a whole presentation on motion graphics in Unreal Engine that was titled, what was it titled? It was titled...
It was badly titled. It was like using Unreal Engine for television production, I think. And so obviously, like, the first thing I said in that talk is, this is an extremely broad topic. We could cover a zillion different things. So today we're going to talk about motion graphics. Specifically, I was talking about just like a little like teaser, like interstitial kind of logo, bump or hit that. So hopefully we'll have a link to that if you guys want to check out the first half of it. And then and today hopefully I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the things that I just had to just blow through 30 minutes, and I was like, all right, I got it in, I showed it, all right, next. And so hopefully I'm going to open up the same project and just kind of dive into a couple of things that I wish I could have spent more time on. I just didn't have time.
But even one of the newer features in 4.25 is that we've greatly enhanced the ability to actually render text in Unreal Engine, which I know is one of the things that a lot of people in motion media, motion graphics really want and need. And so that's something you had to import all the time, and now it's something you don't need to import as much. So, even though sequencer is a key element and media framework's a key element and our cameras are a key element and those things, now you can do a decent amount of animation and do some really nice things with text. I remember before, just really using text in Unreal Engine was kind of painful, and you didn't want to do it, right? But now it's actually pretty straightforward.
It could be, mostly because at that time it was kind of constrained to like the UMG, which Unreal Motion Graphics is kind of an interesting way to put UI tools, right? Because that's kind of what it usually is used for. But yeah, usually text was kind of stuck in that realm, and now that you have this like 3D text tool, and yes, you can just not put an extrude on it, and then it's a 2D text tool, right? It's it works the same way. But I found it to be super helpful in some of the simple animation like controls that they gave. I was like, this is brilliant, because it's just something you've come to expect in other applications. Like I don't want to have to like, keyframe like, them to like wipe out in a certain direction like that, and so now you can just set and here's your in, here's your out, and it's like one slider. Perfect. That's exactly what I needed for a lot of cases. I don't think it got like a big update in 26 or anything like that, but some of the things we're trying to work on just is stuff like where you would have like cutout text, like, so it's just the outline, stuff like that. Like right now is a little difficult to do. And then also just making sure that all of our foreign language support. And they did do some work on like Arabic text and some other characters that were kind of a little funny at times. And so hopefully that's solved. But if for some reason you are running into this, definitely let us know whether it's on however you got it. But we want to make sure that it does work. So at least if you are using it, the characters are.
Right. Well, if there's nothing else that Tom or Mark want to bring up at the moment, or anything that you guys want to bring up immediately at the chat, why don't we let you jump in?
Actually.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I've realized that we've talked about motion graphics and said how things are called motion graphics, and then you just said a couple of words here: interstitial and bumper. And I'm wondering if our audience has any idea what we're talking
about. What that is. All right. Yeah.
So, obviously,
that's good. That's
a little confusing. Like, what is motion graphics? Are UMGs motion graphics? And I think like a lot of stuff.
No, I never want to assume people know too little or too much, right? Because like there's plenty of things right, but so UMG inside of Unreal is what is referred to whenever you're thinking widgets or UI, that's usually like the go-to. But like it does have the same, it has all of these things that you would expect to see, which is kind of interesting. Like there's bubbles, there's borders, there's text things, there's boxes, there's scaling nodes. Like a lot of these things are super useful if you were kind of in that realm. But I guess like I hate to stay in that realm because I'm like, I got this great 3D engine. Why are we doing this? And so I tend to just kind of bypass right by it, but it's totally viable for all of that stuff. So not to skip over that. But I honestly, like, as soon as I was like, I can play back clips in the world, I'll just do that. I don't want to have to worry about doing it. But if you're designing for, especially if you are going to design for like mobile platforms and stuff like that, it's a great place to do it because it has all the scaling tools and constraints and all the stuff that you would need with, landscape versus portrait and like all this stuff. Like if this is your target, it's awesome because you can actually leverage all of that stuff.
It's really more geared towards like runtime motion graphics, really like interactive for in games and interactive applications.
But it does have a timeline. It's got a timeline. You can keyframe it if you want, but
put materials in there and
it really, I mean, you can use it, but I tend to stick more with just a regular sequencer because that's what the render queue is kind of meant with. You can definitely get UMG out of it, but it's just not quite as like obvious, because it's meant to run at runtime. But when I say interstitial, like I don't know if you've ever watched television like in your life, usually like if you're going from one segment to another, there'll be this kind of like interesting transition graphic, right? It just does something when they go to talk about the next topics. Think about like news tossing to sports, right? They'll be like, and now sports, and it's like, whew, the stuff flies in, and then you get the guy standing in front of the green, right? That's an interstitial. A bumper is something usually that like I call it, that's it, like the top or like the end of a TV segment, right? So when you're coming into the show, there'll be some sort of like loop where the logo swirls in, or maybe sponsor stuff. That's like a bumper typically. And so all of these things though, like there's now when you watch it, especially if you watch, like there's thousands of that happen, like
all
I mean,
time.
You're like almost bombarded with it, and there's the ticker and there's the top, and then you got these things that slide in, and now there's like AR elements. Like all these things are designed by large teams trying to do as fast as possible because so a lot of these things like are still applicable, like whether it's sports or whether it's whether you're actually just making straight up like advertisements, or especially like now, I mean, joking about it when we hopped on the Twitch stream, like there's an ad, somebody made that's motion graphics. Like like every one of those, like somebody's getting paid good money for it. So right. Absolutely. Yeah, was there anything else on that one though? Were there any other industry terms I used that I probably should explain? So, cause I'm not like super like, I haven't been around for like decades in the industry. I'm not quite that old yet, but yeah, you kind of get this link out you at some point, and I'm like, oh yeah, somebody might not even. So. Visual segue or transition mind to accentuate the change. That's perfect definition. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, if there wasn't anything else, I can kind of jump in and kind of toy around a little bit and show you guys a little bit.
It's all you.
Cool. All right, so let's do this share screen and go here, and then hopefully this is everybody can see this. Yeah,
we got it.
I see it popping up. All right, cool, awesome. And so if anybody did see my previous Unreal Fest, like this should somewhat look familiar. And basically, I just made this really simple. I'll pilot the camera here. Really simple move where you're kind of like just like a little kind of camera move, graphics, some text, and actually in the background, I'm just it's actually a video just on a curved surface. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to kind of dissect like what I was doing because I just needed to fly through some of these topics so quickly. But essentially all I have is I have a curved video like wall, so to speak, that I'm playing back a video on. In this case, when I say video, I'm kind of using that term loosely because it is actually when you're using videos inside of Unreal, there's nothing wrong with using video. They'll play back, especially if you're working in real time. But if you're going to render out for frame accuracy, image sequences are the best way to ensure you get the result you want. Right now, our media framework is not necessarily guaranteed to be frame accurate for video. So if you're going to render out, you're going to want to use image sequences. But other than that, like if you're just doing something, it's like a video loop, it's a background thing that doesn't require frame accuracy. Yeah, use whatever you want. MP or we support ProRes, HAP. Like I went through all these in my talks, so I'm not going to reiterate too much of that. But some of the stuff I didn't actually get to show in here, because I kind of just threw it in and just kind of kept going. Is it that these media tracks are actually extremely helpful because they bypass a lot of the things that you used to have to set up when you were going to set up a playback. So typically, like when I went through this, I showed how to create all of these assets. Like you need like the source, the player, and then there's a material, and then an instance, and so when you're using the media track though, you don't need all these things because you actually just right click on the asset, and in the properties you just set the media texture like directly, so you don't have to kind of go through this thing where you would actually go in and like in my level blueprint where I have it just not connected, like opening the source and doing play. Like these things are actually handled by the sequencer instead. So it's a really nice way to work with it, especially if you know kind of what you're doing with the media tracks and stuff, because it's really not that hard. You just add a media track right down here at the bottom, and then you just tell it like, what are we going to add? And you can literally just pick it from here, and makes it incredibly easy to deal with as opposed to learning some blueprints. So that was one thing I definitely wanted to make sure that people were aware of. Now, same thing that you would expect, you can trim these up. I can play around with like settings like that where now all of a sudden like it's a hold frame because it's not doing anything, right? But one thing that maybe wasn't so obvious about this is, unlike maybe a traditional DCC that you would, or sorry, not DCC, but like linear editor that you would use, there isn't a way to like keyframe like opacity and things like this. Like these controls are not controlled by the media track. Literally the media track is just dealing with the playback of the video file. So if you wanted to do something like that, where you're like, okay, I want to just like fade this thing to black, you actually would deal with that on the material level. And so I kind of wanted to maybe just show an idea of like what that might look like if you were going to try and do this, because it may not be incredibly obvious the first time you look at it. So I have kind of my material stacked down here. And so I know just from what I was doing that I was very diligent with my naming. So I used my material instance. And so the only parameter I actually had in here was emissive. And because that was like, I was trying to kind of get a balance between how much I wanted it to be affected by light and not. So I just kind of was using this emissive value. But if I wanted to actually have this thing fade out, or if I wanted to have it just like fade to black, I would need to handle this a slightly different way. And so this also comes up if you're using videos that have alpha channel and things like this is that you have to set the material to actually be something that can use translucency. So I think I skipped that like really quickly in my talk. So I wanted to kind of show how you kind of set that up. You'd set it up the identical way as your other one. So if I open up the media material, like this is all that I was using. A texture sample that uses the media texture that's coming in, just multiplying it times a number for emissive, and then I was plugging in the base color. That way I get a little bit of interaction with the world and a little bit of actually emissive value. But this isn't actually going to work if I want to fade it out, like fade it to the transparency, because there's no opacity that's attached to this. Similarly, if this video had alpha channel, it's not going to work because we're not actually, the alpha channel is not hooked up to anything. So what I'll do, just so I don't break it, I'm just going to duplicate it. So for me, that's Control D, but for most everybody else, it's probably Control W. And I'm gonna just make a, we'll call it media trans for translucency. And then we'll open this up and we'll kind of edit this to make sure that we're using the alpha channel and that we could do this this fade if we wanted to. So the really only thing you need to set is on when you click on the material itself, you kind of get all these properties over here. So instead of the blend mode being opaque, you just pick translucent or mask depending on what you're doing. I'm going to go translucent. So now we have this opacity pin that pops up. You lose your other settings in this case, but I wasn't using them anyway. This is just a video plate, right? So if I wanted to use the alpha channel, just need to plug the alpha in here. It's good. But in my case, like this may or may not do what I want, because if I wanted to fade this out, I need a way to control what the alpha is. And so we could either hook up another parameter and multiply it, or there's a few different ways we could do it. But I just wanted to make sure that it was kind of clear that we need to have access to this channel if we're going to do something with it, right? And so what I'm going to do is just add in a multiply, a simple multiply, which this may or may not be the right way to do this. Depending on your circumstances, it may not get the job done, but in my case, this is going to be fairly simple. So if I multiply this thing times 0, right, it's going to disappear. If it is times 1, it should be whatever the alpha channel was, right? And so this modulating this parameter, I'm going to be able to fade this thing out if I wanted to. So we'll go ahead and I'll show you kind of how that would work. And I guess the other kind of thing, like I mentioned before, if your video has alpha channel in it, which I have one that does, and I can kind of show you, if you don't have this hooked up, it's not going to do anything. And I think that's kind of the #1 thing I've seen people like, how do I use the alpha channel? Like, it just has to be hooked up. And that's kind of the main thing. So what I'll do now is I have this curved screen. I'll just replace it with this transparent material, and not much to change. I think I may have a slightly different setting here, but now this material is transparent. So, however, to be like super proper, I'm actually going to create a material instance for this, because we always want to use instances if we want to be able to kind of address them separately from their master material. And I'll show kind of an example of how that can be helpful in the sequencer once I kind of show this thing done. So now I have this material instance. So when I open that up, you'll see now I have this opacity channel is exposed, and I can kind of see in real time kind of what I want to do. So so if I fade from 1 to 0, I should be able to get the effect that I'm looking for if I wanted to fade this media out, right? So if I hop into sequencer now, so when you're inside sequencer, everything's kind of got a nested hierarchy, which shouldn't be that unusual to see. I already kind of have what I was looking for here done earlier, but since I have a different material, I'm going to go ahead and delete that one from it. So what we have is like, I have the kind of base like instance of this. So that's my curved screen. Then if you have that just by itself with a transform track, it may look like this. So what you would actually do to get to it is you add a track, and I'm going to get the static mesh component here. And then within that, I get access to all these other things that are on that static mesh component. So This is where you could actually hook up a material switcher too. I don't know if many people know about this, but if you were to pop this in here, you could actually just use this to swap materials. It's going to be like a hard cut, of course, but if you wanted to do it, if I want to get the material parameters, I actually want to use this one. So when it says element 0, that actually correlates to this. Like, so if you had multiple materials attached to this mesh, you would see multiple things in here. That's all that it's doing at this point. Now within that, should have access to the things that go along with that. So I should actually be able to see my emissive and my opacity, but I feel like for whatever reason, I'm getting a bad result because it didn't really know that I had changed this. So this will be good. So if I have that selected, I can just load it straight. I can just say add curve screen, and I'm just gonna get that stack mesh component again because I don't think it knew really that I changed it. So, interesting. Still getting the same thing. So that 3, it keeps giving me this media mat. Oh wait, do I not actually have it on there? Did I never actually put it on correctly? Oh, interesting. Interesting.
I swear I saw you put it on there.
I thought I did too, but yeah, I keep getting, okay, now it says trans animated for. Okay, great. Because what actually is happening, like when you do this, like, and this is something to note, I was going to show this in the other video, but when you start using these in here, you'll notice that this has changed, right? This isn't like what I actually put in there. Because what it actually does kind of behind the scenes is create a material instance dynamic for you, and it will just kind of automatically generate more of them depending on what you're doing and what you change. And so this is actually extremely helpful so that you don't have to learn how to do material instance dynamics and all this stuff. It's just going to do it automatically for you in the background, which is pretty handy. But now I do have access to my opacity channel, which is what I wanted. So I have auto keyframe on, so you can see whenever I actually just even like add it in here, it's like generating keyframes for me. That may or may not be what you want, so you can just turn it on or off from here. In my case, it's fine. I'm just gonna like delete them anyway, so we can see what we're doing. And so when we get back to the start of this, once I'm gonna keyframe it at 1, so that should be my opacity at full here. And then if I go scrub forward in time and add a new, I didn't actually add a keyframe back there. We add that. There we go. So I got 1 here, and then I'm going to go hop over to this one and put this at 0. So now when I go back and forth, I should, in theory, I would have expected to see it actually scroll down. But the other thing that I'm thinking I'm seeing here is that I also have some other things going on where I'm using my emissive channel. So I kind of want to make sure that I'm actually looking at like the right thing. But this is what I want to get done, is I want to make sure that this is actually going to animate my fade out, as it were, in this case. So the other thing to note is that I actually have 2 screens that are one behind, kind of sitting in here. So I'm using this one, and this one is to just do this bottom thing at the bottom, in case you were wondering like what that was for. All right, so now let's kind of dissect what is going on with my opacity, because in my mind, I should, when I get to this point, I should be multiplying times 0. And I would think, be getting this when I do it. But for whatever reason, I'm not in this case. So I kind of want to see why that is, because that doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. But I'm wondering if it's because I keep getting this new media mat that isn't my transparent one. I'm not entirely sure why it really just wants to grab that instead of this this one that I created.
You maybe if you close sequencer, I wonder if it's applying it like as a sequencer, like it wasn't,
you know what?
there.
I didn't grab the instance. I keep grabbing that. There we go. Okay.
That'll do it every time.
Well, it could be part of it,
Could
but
be
it's what I'm seeing though is it seems like I have here, it's popping between these 2 things, and for whatever reason, it doesn't want to play nice, I think, because I've already done something with this in the scene. So I may actually need to load a different sequence and load it back up. But this is fun, like, because I always love finding out about bugs when I'm doing a live stream. All right.
Does show this is live.
Yeah, it definitely does.
That's one of my favorite things too.
Yeah, it's good. I really do want to like at some point dissect like what is happening, but I feel like whenever I'm doing this, like I have this instance here and I really need to, I believe before I add it, I need to actually have it correct. Otherwise, when I am adding this and changing it, I think I'm getting a discrepancy. So I'm going to go and make sure that I have my transparent material on here first. So that's good. Then I will add this track. And hopefully at this point, it should not have changed. That's good. And I'll add my opacity. It's at 0. It's still at 0. That makes sense. Okay. So for anybody who wants to know what went wrong there, before I add this material, like track here, I need to make sure the material that I have set is the correct one. Because what was happening is no matter what, it already was in its mode. It was already making these internal, these dynamic instances. So every time I would change something, it's just going to go back to this. So to kind of reiterate, before you actually add the material here, make sure you have the correct one assigned in the world, right? And so now we should get the thing that we want. And that's just me being lazy and probably trying to do this too fast, right? And so now it should do kind of exactly what I'm expecting. So I have my opacity at 1. I go over here, set my opacity back to 0, and I'll get this kind of fade out like thing that I was kind of hoping for from the get-go. So that's one kind of thing to note about this is if you're working with materials and things like that, like you still have to set up those controls like inside the material. So similarly, if we wanted to kind of add like another control to this, we wanted to have like a color in here, we could do that as well. So we could actually just go and, inside the master, we could add like another multiply and multiply this time the color, right? So if we just do like a vector 3 here, so now I have a color, and we could plug this into our emissive channel, and now we're going to add kind of this, emissive color multiplier to this as well if we wanted to. So we could, decide we want to add, multiply times red or something else. We got our nice little shaders compiling here. But this would be how you would maybe add like, like a tint or something like this if you wanted to, whatever, control that as well. So now if I expose this, as a parameter, and I just call it color. Once I go back, I should get this option to do that. And then I could also animate this as part of the sequencer as well. So once I get back here, in theory, now I have this color channel as well. So I could twirl this down and animate in the amount of red that I want to have in this, if for whatever reason that was what we wanted to do. So I already have all my keyframes here. So if I slide forward in time and like so now I could have this like where it like kind of like goes towards red as it's fading out kind of thing. And again, this is all just depends on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. But I wanted to make sure that that part was kind of clear because I kind of glossed over some of that in the first one. Something else with regard to materials that I feel like is kind of like you can probably see some of them moving in here. Like they're extremely powerful. Like there's a lot of things in materials that you can do that are gonna just aid in anything that you're trying to do and trying to make things look interesting. And so I know we talked about this in the beginning, but I really like to encourage that people like spend some time with the materials, like actually get like kind of comfortable with how they work and how instances work and stuff like this. Because I made a separate app here, and I just kind of wanted to, yeah, sure, we'll save that. Kind of show like another like kind of idea with this, and so I made these 2 cubes and just kind of to show what I mean when I say using instances versus just regular materials. So I have these 2 things, and they both have this animated masked element on them. But since I'm using this, my material instance, I've added one of them to the sequencer track and the other one is not in it, right? So you can kind of see this one's in the sequencer track and this one isn't. So even though they are deriving from the same material, they're using a different instance, so to speak. And so I could actually inside of here like animate, one of them to do something completely different from the other. And so again, like it's just nice to have this control where even though they're kind of deriving from the same thing, I'm not adding like, loads. I don't have to add a new material for every one of these I want to do for every variation. I can just kind of address the instance like separately. And this makes it super useful if you're just trying to create, lots of simple, changes. It's like, okay, so now I just want to, add, this one in. So now that's material cube 3. So I could do the same thing on this one where I want to, use the material on this guy, and I could even play with, these are the other things I had exposed. So if I wanted to change the tiling or like the speed of like this this effect that's on it, like I can do that separately, even though they're all deriving from the same material.
So let me ask you a question about that. So what you're saying is that, because I didn't know this, is that in Sequencer actually underneath the hood creates a dynamic material instance and then swaps it per frame? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, essentially you have control over that parameter. Like,
it's kind of like it's like a construction script underneath, right?
Yeah, more or less. Like, it's kind of a pretty powerful way to work with it because, I don't have to like think about the operator for this. Like I can just take this speed and just kind of go over here and then, drop in a new keyframe and put it to 0, right? And so then between here and here, it's actually going to modulate the speed, right? And it's just an interesting way to deal with this kind of stuff.
Right, because I've used this functionality in Sequencer, but I didn't know that's what it was doing under the hood. And I didn't see actually the material instance ticking up like I'm watching it do here for your scene. That's really cool.
Yeah,
that's
it's pretty,
really cool.
I guess in the video, it's probably coming across a little bit like little choppy, but it's actually a pretty interesting way to deal with it.
That's fascinating.
That's really important for this sort of work too, because you are so often dealing with like, oh, we need like 8 layers of stripes zipping across, and they're all different colors and slightly different properties, and to have to do that with the material instance system.
It's a lot of work.
That would be a lot of work. So just having that understanding, like, I can just modify them on, and it's, I think for people who are coming from using Unreal as like a game engine, it's not obvious. But I think for anyone else, it would just seem obvious. Oh, I just want to change the color of it. And not having, and you've said this a couple times, like Sequencer kind of does some stuff in the background for you.
It's pretty nice, actually.
Kind of master that. You're like, just put that in there, and
you don't need to understand it completely. Like, obviously, when certain things like go wrong, like earlier, like the problem I was having, I'm like, all right, why is it doing it? It's because it would already, as soon as you add this material property to it, like it's created the instance at that point. Right. So anything I kind of do in the world at that point, it's just overriding it, right? And so that's kind of what was happening.
It's like that track is an instance. So once you add that track, that's when it creates the instance, and then you have access to all the properties.
So exactly. Cool. And so what you'll see here is like that actual thing is named, material instance emissive mask 2, but this underscore animated 2 is what it's added for you to let you know, like, hey, this is an instance of something that's being driven by this,
that is
animated,
super cool.
So animated by the track. It is really cool. And so one of the other things that I kind of has come up to is like, all right, well, what if I had like a bunch more of things and I wanted to, maybe address them from the same material, instead of having, what if I don't want this going on? And you can do it a number of ways, but one thing that I didn't really cover too is this idea of a material parameter collection. Because like it also applies in this scenario where you could design a material that is going to be like a master color for like things. And so you can also have this material parameter collection track, which a lot of people again like don't necessarily know exactly what this is. And I like material parameter collections only because to me it's very organized. There are some drawbacks that you have to create them. Like you want to make sure you have as many parameters as you're going to need, because every time you change it, save it, it has to recompile and it's going to break references in some cases. But it's another option. So, but what I was actually doing here was, it's a kind of a popular thing in motion graphics to just have like, clones of objects and have them do some sort of action. And so I wanted to kind of challenge myself to see like, can I recreate some of this stuff, just using regular blueprints? And I am by far not a blueprint programmer, like in any stretch of the imagination. So But what I did is I just wrote this simple thing to kind of make them work in like a sine wave pattern. So if I hit play on this, like what should happen is they should kind of be bouncing around in this kind of nice, like, just like, pattern, right? And since it is actually, a blueprint, and I just have like public, I have variables, like I can change the speed, the offset, and the size, kind of based on whatever it was that I wanted to do. So if I wanted to change this and then make them go, much slower and adjust the offset, so maybe it's not so deep, like I can do this, and then I'll get this kind of effect as well, where now it's moving a little bit more slowly, and they're not quite so offset. And again, like this didn't take me like a ton of time. Like, again, I'm not a master programmer by any means, but all I decided to do is like I just wanted to pick the actors in the scene based on a tag. So I put a tag on them called sign1. And if you aren't familiar with where that's done, where you scroll down, usually when you get to this actor section, this is going to be kind of like that. Like you won't see it, but if you twirl this down, you have this section here where you can add tags to it. So I literally just created one cube, put this on it, duplicated it 5 times, and then just grabbed all 5 of those and duplicated that 4 times, right? Super simple. So I just like literally I can even, if I wanted to do it from here, like if I wanted to add another row, I just alt drag it out, and there we go. Now I have some more. And now these are gonna, since they have this tag, they're just gonna play along as well, right? And then I'm using, anytime you have an array, like if you're not a programmer, that usually means a for each loop is coming. Like, it's not always 100%, but I would say 80% of cases, if I have an array, this is the next thing I'm going to do. And all I'm doing here is I wanted, the basis of this was I wanted to use a sine wave. That was like, okay, I need to know how to, I just want to apply a sine wave to this. So a sine wave, and if you're not super hip on math, like it just generates a value between -1 and 1 in a nice cyclical fashion. Exactly. And so depending on where you multiply, if you multiply ahead of that, you're going to increase the frequency. If you multiply outside of that or afterwards, you're going to increase like the amplitude, the size. So I just put variables for those. I needed something that's always moving to drive the sine wave. So I just used game time since creation. And then this part here was the offset part, was the interesting part, because a sine wave by itself like isn't necessarily like all that interesting. Like if I just do 0, like they all kind of do the same thing. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't really want this. I want it to be something that does something a little more interesting. So using like some stuff on the front end of this, I could actually affect like how this stuff is. All right, I gotta actually restart it. But if I change this number back to kind of how it was, we'll crank the speed up again too, so that it's a little more obvious what's going on. Not quite that high. I wanted something like this, like where I wanted them to all kind of, work off the same wave, but just be affected in like a slightly different way. And so to create this, I'm just getting the length of the group. So how many, are in this? And then we, since arrays work on index 0, you might want to add 1 to it first, so that first one's always going to be a little janky. And then just divide it into each other and multiply times this offset number. So all I'm essentially doing is trying to give it like a slot, so it knows like, all right, from the front of the wave to the back of the wave, do it in like an offset pattern. Again, like this didn't take a ton of time, like, and it's all running off tick. So again, like if I was a master programmer, I would probably not do this, but for the simple stuff, like I was like, yes, this will get the job done. And there's no reason I couldn't render this out. I can use it in game, and there's just an infinite number of things I could do this. So I always want to challenge people to try and use some of these things, because it's really not always that difficult to do. One other thing that I feel like a lot of people sometimes just want to do is like rotate an object on its axis. Like, and I feel like I've seen a ton of bad advice on how to do this. So I'm just going to show everybody the easiest way to do this ever, like ever. There's a component that you can literally just add to it called rotating movement. And all this does is whatever this value is, it's going to determine like the speed at which it rotates on that axis. So literally, if I just hit play, go over there, it's just going to rotate in place. And like I've seen a ton of different things, and I was like, it really couldn't be simpler in some cases. So use the rotator. You'll be very, very happy if that was what you were
and
trying to go
it's
for.
written and implemented in C, so it's ever
super fast.
so much faster than doing it in Blueprint. I think
also,
it is actually significantly faster.
You can, it is, and you can adjust that one in real time too, which is great. Same thing, super nice. So if you wanted to dial it in, but like, yeah, sometimes like I'm just like, I just need to see something moving so I can like, make sure that like this, check things like motion blur or whatever it is I'm looking at, rotating movement.
Look, motion
super
graphics.
Nice. Yeah, exactly. Really bad motion graphics. But this is kind of some of the stuff that gets done over and over and over again. Another just kind of useful one, and this is actually what was used in the little screenshot that we used for the thing, is this idea of a decal. And like a decal is a really cool way to do a lot of these like projection kind of things that we want to do a lot of cases where it's like, okay, I want to layer something over the top of like a lot of objects. So if it looks kind of funny in the beginning, that's because there's a default material that I don't know where we got this from, but it's not my favorite. But we can definitely go in and kind of pick something maybe a little bit more interesting. Actually, I'll just use the color. Let's see. Yeah, this guy, color grid, right? So we can kind of see like more what's going on. But the same idea could be done for a lot of different things. Like you can use this decal to actually project like what you want onto other objects. And I really like this thing. If you haven't played around with decals, like it's a really nice, like just interesting way to get like different looks and stuff, and you can kind of project it onto objects, and it's just a pretty interesting tool. The default one is actually like this I don't know, kind of green texture-y thing, which is why I'm still seeing it. But it's an interesting tool, and I kind of highly recommend people play around with the decal because it'll get you some interesting results for sure. How much more time do I have? I might have a couple more things, but I don't want to keep talking forever.
You're good. Let's see, what time is it? Yeah, you're fine. You're
okay.
fine.
There was a couple other like small things like on just like that I was.
This is fascinating. So go for it.
No, it's all good. Like there are a couple other things like that I wanted to just maybe touch on, and a lot of that kind of stemmed from this idea of the new movie render queue, and I kind of blew through this and like the last one too, because there's just so much that you could actually talk about inside of this as far as settings and what's going on. But I wanted to just touch on maybe a few changes that are coming for 426 in this area, because this was something that was new in 425, and there were already like a lot of just options in here that that I had actually set up, I guess, before. And so I just kind of wanted to maybe chat about a few of these things. The big one that I think that most people will spend the most time on is in this anti-aliasing setting, and the camera kind of playing with these kinds of settings. But there's definitely some things coming in the next version that are going to be significantly better. Like you're going to get a few more options as far as like output formats. There's actually going to be some video encoding options that you're going to be able to have, so that's a big plus. They're going to bring back a few. If people remember from the old one, there were these options for where you could get different custom render passes, and then you could kind of add what passes you want. Not all of these are coming back, but some of them are. And there's also going to be the ability to use like custom depth stencils and other things like that to generate these masks. So that's going to be something else to look out for. But the other thing that's going to be nice is right now I just have a single sequence, and like that's fine. That makes it pretty easy to kind of handle. But a lot of times your sequencer is going to be a little bit messier than that, right? So if I add in like we'll just call this sub 1, and then I'll just duplicate this and make a few of these. Sub 3. Okay, so now I have 3 subsequences, and then I'll make one that is like our let's call this one call this our master one, right? And so inside of here, like you can actually have these sub scenes, which is cool. But also we have this thing called shot tracks, which is essentially like not that different. But you can have these sub scenes that are in here, and you may have a lot of these depending on what you're doing. I find I see this a little bit more in like maybe other I hate to say industries, but where they use these shots. But I like these shot tracks, and this is nice because if it's it's essentially just a container for another level sequence. So if you were doing something in this one, you could, do some animation in here. You could loop it. You could do all kinds of other things with it. But in the next version of the movie render queue, you'll actually be able to pick like which shots you want to render out as well, which is pretty handy because sometimes when you're going through, you're like, everything looked great except for like these two, and I don't want, and again, even though it renders out extremely fast, like you just don't want to do it if you don't have to. So there'll be a little toggle switches here to actually determine which shots you want to render out as well. And then same thing, so you could queue this up and render out different different shots that way. And then the hooks for this remote render remote are going to be much more obvious, because right now all render remote really does is it launches like a new instance of the game, which can be useful if you have like a different target map. Make a lot of sense. But being able to hook this up through some sort of like external system, that those hooks are going to be there, and it's going to be a little bit more obvious. Now, it's definitely not just going to be like, oh, I click this and it just magically does it. Like, of course, you have to hook it up to whatever your render queuing system is going to be. But it'll be much more obvious about how to use this, I guess, in the next version. So pretty cool stuff coming for this kind of work. But
I mean, that's huge. This is huge. This is like, I've been using Unreal to render frames for ArcPhase and whatever for over a decade now. And I've done it all through scripts and duct tape and bubblegum and high quality motion blur. So I figured out how to get the frame to pause and do all this crazy stuff. And
And now it's just a tool.
And it's all the things that I've had to kind of
big shout out
and they work. Like, before it's like, oh, I can't use vignetting because the thing, I'll see all the vignette. I just use it now. It just works, and that's what's when I got it. It's one of those I just poke the heck out of, and I'm like, yeah, that works.
There's another thing that's really huge in the render queue, which is in the previous render, you could not render 16-bit EXR. But in this one, you can render 16-bit EXR, which is enormous.
I mean, the other thing too, like, if you do whatever, I have this as PNG as no alpha, but like this button, like, in the old one, that was a hard, like you had to do a lot to get an alpha channel, and so now it's just like it's going to tell you that you need to enable this, and again, like even just these little hints to me are nice. They're a nice improvement, because sometimes you just wouldn't know why it wasn't working. So big props to especially, I think it's like mostly Matt Hoffman who's been doing this. So he's been doing us a good service here for sure.
Yeah.
But just having that is like,
there was a question
that makes it so much easier.
Question about being able to set this up and then save it. Where did you save the presets for your render queue?
Got it. So by default, when you do the save as preset, it's going to put it inside the cinematics movie pipeline presets folder. But you can pick the default location for that. So again, like just like anything in Unreal, there's a setting for that, right? So if you actually go down to the movie render pipeline, you can actually pick here, where you want your preset save location.
So if you're pipelining, you can put it someplace else.
Exactly. You can put it outside the project if you want to as well. Yep, exactly. And so you can also set what you want their default stuff to be. There's actually a decent amount of settings in here, which is kind of nice. And that's also getting expanded and nicer. And as Tom mentioned, though, like you can queue all this stuff up from like command line as well, too. If you really, I mean, same thing. You could literally not have Unreal running and have it just be headless and run this thing from spawn the game instance, render it out, close the game instance. So it's pretty powerful if you really want to dive into it. The last kind of thing really that I just wanted to chat about was like, this is the one where I think I get the most questions. It's like, what are the settings for here? Why, what do these actually do? And basically, because there's kind of this idea of like, we want to render it out, we want to have an anti-aliasing, but why do we have these extra settings, and why can't we just use regular TAA and stuff like that? And technically you can use just a regular inbuilt engine TAA, but this just gives you a lot more control over what you're doing, because like when you're rendering it out, like especially if you're using ray tracing or something like that, like you can actually just turn off the denoising, just crank these samples to like an obscene level and let it just chew at it for an obscene amount of time and get some really, really high quality stuff out of this.
Old school.
Yeah, exactly. If you wanted to, if you're one of those kind of people. And one thing they're also going to allow you to do in the new one, you'll be able to render out the path tracer. So I don't know if anybody really knows this other than but if you actually have ray tracing turned on, you can actually view like what the path tracer output is like. So you can kind of just use that as like a check and for your sanity to make sure that ray tracing is doing what you want. But they're actually going to give you the ability to render that out. So you can actually just use like a Unreal's brute force path tracer if you really want to.
What? We've added the ability to wait for frames now?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. We've done the opposite of what we all want. but the big thing I wanted to kind of try and clear up, and again, I'll probably not do as good of a job of explaining it as somebody else who wrote this, but even though this sounds counterintuitive, like temporal sample count is actually what controls motion blur. And spatial sample count is actually what it deals with anti-aliasing. So there's little tooltips that pop up, and here's maybe another good just tip. If you want to not have those tooltips pop up so much, there's a CVAR, Slate tooltip summon delay. If you put that in and then just put in like, I don't know, a number like 2, then you won't get a tooltip instantly, right? It will wait, a certain amount of time before you get the tooltip.
That's cool. I didn't know that either. Nice.
Yeah, it's a really, really handy one because, that's pretty. Some of them
it gets in the way sometimes. Yeah.
And so this that's how much time. So little fun fact there. But so basically, the way these two work, though, the temporal sample count is determining like how many frames on either side of it's not actually frames, but how many samples on either side of the frame are we going to take before we render this and basically just do like an additive type effect for it. So that's why it's meant for motion blur. So if you set this to 0, it's essentially no motion, right? You got a question?
You can actually visualize the motion vectors in the viewport, right? I remember seeing that as a view mode. I thought,
yeah, definitely. There is. I mean, I don't know if this actually like how that works with that. But this is just like the number of how many samples on either side do we want to take of it. But this is affected by this shutter angle, and this is where, like you said, knowing something about cameras can be useful, because if you don't, depending on what your shutter angle is, you're going to get a different result, right? Because if it's open for longer or shorter amounts of time, you will get a different result with your motion blur than and so this is taking that into account. And that's what it's trying to say, inside the tooltip. It's like this is being used, so it says it's now going to take this shutter angle into effect, right? The spatial sample count is the anti-aliasing. So in this case, if this is a really oversimplified way of saying it, but the way TAA works, it essentially jitters the camera around a certain number of times. So in this case, we're going to do like 8 camera jitters, right? So 8 slight jitters to get the AA. But if we have 8 of these and 8 of these, it's essentially going to take 64 subsamples to render this single frame. So they do have a multiplicative effect, so to speak. So that's why if you have low numbers here, you can say, it says, hey, traditional TAA uses 8 samples. So right now you're using less samples than if you were to just leave TAA on. This is what it's telling you. So you may just decide to leave it on. But as soon as you get to a number that's over that amount, right, it's gonna recommend, actually, if I have this on, it's going to say, hey, this is actually, well, first of all, it's going to tell you can't use an even number of samples. But if we had it so that this is, a number that's going to give me an odd number, it's going to say, hey, the product of this is greater than what you would have anyway. So you might as well just turn this off. It's just making it more blurry than it needs to be. And so that's kind of what these things do. And I think that, for a lot of cases, you don't have to be that exact about it. People are like, what are the exact best settings? I'm like, I don't know. Honestly, I just go with
depends.
8. Yeah. I just go with 8 and 8, and if it doesn't take that long, great. That's a good setting for me. But it really, there's not too much of an art to it that I would say. But I will say that if you are going to be using a large number of them, anything that's over if you multiply these two numbers together and it's more than 8, just turn it off, because you will at some point notice wow, it looks blurry because you've got a compounding TAA effect on top of this, and so you can get that to happen. But honestly, I just usually force it to none and then set these to like 8 and 9. That's usually.
Let me ask you
Yep.
a quick question.
Sure.
Because there are a number of questions that are coming through the chat, which I think we'd love for you to address. But
sure.
When you're working with the series of tools that you're working with, whether it's the media framework, whether it's the text rendering stuff, for those of you who have not experienced these tools, there are a number of plugins you have to enable in the editor for some of this stuff to work. And will you just to sort of explain the mindset and the workflow between enabling these plugins? First of all, I think it's important to note that you don't have to go download these plugins. They are all part of the engine. But because there's so much in the engine, not everything's just turned on all the time, right? And so the idea is it's the engine, I don't know, back in, was 17 or 18 kind of changed. Instead of stuffing everything into the base executable, we started modularizing the engine. And so you have to kind of go and turn it on. So what do you have enabled? And, from a motion graphics perspective, what do you typically turn on so that you have all these tool sets enabled?
Right. So maybe this is a good time to address that topic as well at some point too. But if I just launch this, and hopefully there wasn't anything super important on there that shouldn't be shared, but I create template projects, and this is kind of an interesting of course now I'm getting my Vive thing too, because VR is turned on by default. So this is another just interesting kind of thing that get sometimes. But I wanted to show what this template section looks like, and because this did change, and I think these are going to keep expanding and get some more stuff in there that should be useful. But usually when you start a new project, you're going to get something like this, right? And at the bottom, these are the projects that are available for that particular version of the engine. And then you have these product categories down here, right, that give you something. So if you actually go into television and live events, it comes with a few samples that actually have some things there, but this is mine, right? So I used the llama icon, so I know what it is. But this one has all of my settings and everything turned on already. So I don't have to keep doing this over and over again every time I start a new project, because some people work, if you're in a game dev scenario, I feel like they work on the same project all the time, just different levels. But for me, I start a new project 5 times a day, and this would get really, really annoying having to turn these on and off all the time. So I would highly recommend that if you are going to be doing this and working it a lot, create a template that has all the things turned on that you want already, and this will save you a ton of time.
Great piece of advice.
But just to be more specific about which ones I do and don't turn on, I can just open this up, and what I normally do is I kind of know where some of these are, but for if you're trying to do this quickly, I go up here to the search bar. We love search bars in Unreal. And so I just type in the word media, and that's going to show me most of the ones I need, right off the bat. I have Apple ProRes media. That's if you want to enable playback for ProRes. If you want to enable, this is Avid DNX encoding, not actually playback, just to be clear on that. HAP media, image sequence is usually turned on by default. Medium compositing is usually turned on by default, but these media frameworks, Media IO framework, and movie render pipeline, usually those are the big ones that I need. And then I'm pretty decently good to go. But inside of that, there are a few other things that I kind of will turn on just depending on the project. So inside scripting, there's editor scripting utilities and sequencer scripting. I can't remember. I think this one might be on by default, but maybe not this one.
I think it is now. Editors, I think it is.
Okay, because the editor scripting utilities and these sequencer scripting utilities are actually really good if you're building editor utility widgets and little things like that, because some of these functions are not available unless you have these on. But again, you don't necessarily need those. But I will generally turn them on because I'm I want to write a tool to automate this thing. And so sometimes the access for those is in there. But for the most part, I'd say if you look at the categories, it's usually fairly well, separated.
If you want to make the text that you were making, you need to turn that on because that's not on by default.
Correct. That is one that isn't. So down here at the bottom, the 3D text tool, That one you have to turn on. It's not on by default. And there's another one that kind of goes with this that I didn't talk about, and that probably would have been good. There's also data charts. And I don't know if anybody even knows that exists. But there's actually an asset to create, bar graphs, right? So if you like, it actually has this thing like, what kind of graph would I like to create? And
wow,
here we go. Like,
I never knew that was there.
Who knew? Right? So so you have this kind of color map that kind of determines like what it is across. You can interactively
no more
like,
PowerPoint.
Change. Yeah, great. Now you can do boring sales presentations.
Who the hell made that?
Well, not boring anymore. You can do exciting interactive sales presentations.
Sure. And so what this actually uses, so there's a mesh item here, right? So if you wanted to use like a different mesh for your bars, like you could, like, it's just going to stretch it. But if we were to
llama chart,
find something interesting, like a Vive controller, like, and it's just going to stretch it, like, sure, why not? Like, you could do that. Yeah, if there was a llama in here, right? Actually. But it doesn't. It's just going to kind of stretch it. So whatever you pick, just know that like that's what it's going to do. What is the I think that cube is like too big. But all right, and here's another good one. If you click that little thing, it'll go back to whatever it was. Static mesh bar, fine. But it's actually driven by a data table. So if you're not too sure like what data tables are or how to kind of use them, so I'll turn it on and we can kind of go and look at it. But if you've never used this, like, it's not anything super complex. You can import these from CSV files, and so this is literally like what every chart would be. So you import this in. This is going to be your source, and this is what creates what you see here. Like, and so that's kind of say which one you use. In this case, it's rate, but and then you could also just do it by name, and then I get a really interesting result. So that's how you kind of use that. But similarly, there's pie chart. So now we get really awesome pie chart graphics.
Quick, just to interrupt you for a second, just want to give a shout out to Winbush who joined the stream. Who does a lot of work with Unreal Motion graphics and has a great channel for those of you who want to check out his stuff. Does some really great stuff. You work with him some, right, Patrick? I'm sorry.
Yeah, definitely. And I thanks for pointing that out. I was hoping he might stop in, but we actually, he was doing a bunch of stuff with Maxon already, basically Cinema 40 into Unreal workflow, and so we kind of reached out to him and said, hey, like, we'd like to see you keep doing this. Like, so he actually just made a couple recently where he's kind of animating like the Unreal Engine logo. And he's got a couple more coming. So definitely, if you're into this kind of that workflow, especially, he's doing a really good job. And the other one that I wanted to mention was I might butcher his name, but Tharley VFX. Love his channel as well. He does a lot of good stuff about shader maths and all this kind of stuff.
A total shout out to Winbush, and but he said he had to run, so sorry to interrupt you.
Definitely, I'm glad he was able to swing by. But he's got a lot of good things going right now, and especially coming from that kind of workflow. It's pretty. He has a pretty good like step by step. Like, oh, here's the settings you need. Here's how you import and export, and so really good stuff. So, but yeah, nice, boring, fun charts. But I think other than that, like the plugins, like I encourage people to just kind of like scroll through it at some point. Again, you turn them on, and when you're making your template project, and then you don't have to do it again. But there's a lot of things in here that even like I'll be like, oh, what is that? I didn't even know they added that.
So one of the things that I didn't know, by the way, and I'm sorry because I kind of like to geek out on the text stuff, but when you add text to a project, you have to add the animation component, because I was like, why isn't my text moving? Why is there nothing to move the text? But if you go and watch Patrick's video from Unreal Fest, I
can even just show it real quick, like again, because once you do this text 3D object, and add it in, like on its own, like it doesn't have this
none of the fun stuff
that he's talking about. Yeah, so if you go in here and you just type in text, you get this 3D character transform. That's what you want. So if you want to be able to do
all the fun
types of effects to it, that's where it's actually hidden. So again, I think I blew through this in the thing, but this is actually really, really powerful. I liked
know
the way that it worked, because like, you can just kind of turn this on, and first you're like, okay, what happened? Like it's like, all right, well, it's at zero, right? So not a huge deal. But so you have this scale beginning, right? So you can kind of determine it. So right now it's at 1, 0, 0, and then you have ending, and then you just have this one slider to just animate this thing. And to me, like that would take a long time to write in Blueprints, like
it
for
would.
me, And so to do this, and the fact that also it's it's interactive, it doesn't, like, when you change it, like, it doesn't have to compile. Like, that is a total win for me. I love this stuff. And
how
the scale
many times
range,
do you have to use text in motion graphics?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, exactly. Like, and really, unfortunately, that was one of the reasons I didn't distribute this project, is because I use all kinds of fonts and stuff that I don't have the rights to distribute. But like, literally, you just change it, and it's it's pretty simple. Like, and you can get some pretty interesting results.
And font used to be a real pain in the butt before this tool. Like.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, and again,
importing them, and you could only use certain types, and like now you're just like here, but like you could see it's just the list of fonts that are installed on your system, and
yeah, it's pretty nice. Like, I drop them in the project just so that way if I share the project, like, they're there. But but like on this is a good example. Like right now, like the text is kind of like running into each other. So now all you got to do is go adjust the kerning on it, right? And it's like, this is something that used to be like quite a task, to do.
Yeah.
And now that's all we need, and same thing.
And it's called kerning, the thing you would expect it to be called.
Yeah. And so, same thing, like, if you're working with text that's longer. So, if I do second line, and let's do third line, right. Right. So now I have like this, this object that has multiple lines of text, and so they give you like and I misspelling, which is awesome. But they give you like all kinds of other options to deal with this too. Like, how do I want to deal with my alignment? Well, do I want to go off the first line? Do I want to go off the top of it? Do I want to align to the center or the bottom, right? And then the horizontal alignment. So I could say, okay, I want to do center and bottom, right? In this case, is I feel like a lot of times what I want, because that's where I want to be able to grab this and manipulate it. And so, like, just doing something like that, like changing the pivot around on something, like previously was like kind of a nightmare. But now, super simple. If you wanted to change like the spacing between lines, same thing. It works the same way that the kerning does, like, where it's just you kind of slide it around. You can adjust the spacing just between words if you wanted to.
Trying to do that in Photoshop sucks.
It's sometimes a little bit, Photoshop is not real easy with it either. After Effects has good controls for it, but and then you can actually use these max widths and heights if you wanted to actually constrain things too, which is kind of nice, because sometimes you have a certain amount of space that you cannot exceed, and it will just use these and kind of use it, squish and stretch it appropriately, which is super nice. But I really liked the way all this was done, and like, with this transform, like the scale range too. Like, so normally, like right now, it kind of does it like like this, and you kind of, so it's like, okay, it all kind of comes from that bottom corner. But if I didn't want to do that, I could also do it so that it kind of does it from the center, right? And it's just like, it really makes like a ton of sense to me, like how this thing works and how it operates. Like, oh, okay, I get it now. And the scale range for me was interesting, because at first I wasn't sure what it did, but like, it'll be obvious. Like, now I'm getting a completely different effect, right? Than the other way, because I'm changing the way the range works, right? Like, so it's not going to actually like fade out the next letter until the first one's done. Whereas if I put this like, partially up, then I kind of get this like, okay, now it's like starting to kind of fade them, in a line. So really, really interesting that we can kind of get this different effect just by changing like, the range factor. Whereas like, if I put it like this, they're all going to basically operate at the same time. Or if I could just want to go letter by letter, it's really, really cool, and it's all just a nice little thing. And all these, in case you didn't know, are keyframeable. So if I wanted to go into my sequencer and just do that, like, I can just add a keyframe, and it automatically adds the track.
Yeah, that's what those little ticks are for everybody.
Good to go, right? So now I can just easily say, okay, I want to. I don't necessarily want to do scale enabled, but if I were to go back to the front here and just do scale progress. So I do one at 100 and I scroll forward a little bit, and then I just, I'm in auto keyframe. So if I just do this, like, there we go, done. Like, and like, that's like, that's really pretty powerful that that's in there and you can do that. The thing I didn't have a ton of time, I think I glossed over this really quick, is inside here you also get some other options that you don't get over here, right? So we have a different material for like front, back, and whatever on this. So let me hide some of these so I can actually just grab mine really quickly. So we'll put a missive on the front. We'll put like this something on the bevel. Let's just do something different so we can kind of see what's going on. And the back is whatever. So like right now it's per like all of the, every letter is going to get these same settings applied to it. I actually don't have a bevel. That's why you don't see that black at this exact moment. If I actually add the bevel, then we can see that little black material start to kind of creep in there on the edges, right? But down here, you actually get access to all of them if you wanted. So wow. Sometimes like you with great power comes great responsibility. So we wanted to like hide this from people. But if you really wanted to, I can get the a different, I could use each static mesh component completely separately, right? Yeah. So I could actually just say, okay, I want to deal with like just this first like letter. And then kind of change what materials are on that. So these are the switcher, or the element for each one of these four, just for this first letter, right? So if I wanted to change like just this here, I don't know if I have any. Yeah, I could do just like the color and animate like just the color of like just that one, which is pretty cool actually. Wow. So you can get pretty deep and granular into this if you wanted to, which again,
the tool is not just an afterthought, it's a tool.
No, yeah, exactly. They did kind of think this through, and like I said, the only thing right now that is a little bit tricky to deal with is if you wanted to do something where like I think I did one where I tried to make a transparent mask here. So because I was like, okay, what if I wanted to not see, I just wanted like an outline, so to speak. And it works somewhat, but you can see some of the problems with it, right? Because like they're not necessarily double-faced in this case, right? But I mean, again, I could go in here and say, okay, like if I kind of wanted to make this work, actually I need to get not the instance, but the parent, right? And if I go in here and I were to make this double-sided
material,
like that would kind of fix like this thing. So I wouldn't necessarily I wouldn't see through it in the same way, but it's still not quite the same as an outline material. But it's kind of close. It gets the idea across. So if you kind of wanted to do that,
you could sell that to a client.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And then again, like since they're just materials, you can also do whatever you want with it. So if I wanted to just throw something like super crazy, like you guys probably won't even see this because it's like so ridiculous and fast. But like this like glitchy like material, like there's no reason I could that I couldn't do that like as well. Like I could just I could animate with the material like on top of this. So the fact that it's actually just using that, I felt like was super powerful. It's just an interesting way to kind of get some different effects that maybe like in other applications like that would be very hard. And so sometimes you got to know what your strengths are. Is it maybe is the tool maybe as simple as like Mograph text? Maybe not. I don't know. But could I do this in another application? Not without a lot of work. So depending on what you're kind of sometimes knowing your strengths and playing to your strengths on the application, pretty useful. If there's one last thing I kind of wanted to just touch on, it's this. I kind of have started to on my own kind of build up this little series of like kind of just little materials and tools that I keep with me and I kind of take from project to project. And I would encourage everybody who's working on this and doing this a lot to do that. But this one that comes up all the time is this idea of a gradient. Like, how do I just, all I want to do is have something that kind of fades off like a tail or something like this. And this was like the simplest example that like I could think of. There's probably actually an easier way to do this. But just to kind of give an idea of like what this does. If I open up the instance, like, I exposed like some simple, parameters for this. So not to give a whole talk on materials and material instances, but if you use an instance, technically there is no draw call for anything you do. I mean, is what I'm told, right? So even if I change the texture, no additional draw call, which, depending on what you're doing, is huge and very, very useful. But so what I've actually done, I just have a simple one for power, so I can adjust like how strong is the gradient that I'm using, and then another one for like how do I want it to be applied kind of overall to this. And sometimes dragging it around doesn't always show up well in the stream. Oh, I have a negative here. I just want this to be a positive one. And so this kind of thing, all I've done is I've hooked it up to the opacity channel, but this can be useful for like all kinds of things. Like, anytime I'm doing something, I feel like a gradient is typically pretty useful for what I want to do, whether it's just I want to have something fall off or whatever. And then if I, just want to make it like totally, opaque or I'm sorry, transparent, I can do that as well. So pretty, just good stuff to kind of look. That's where that guy, Thorley VFX, Thorl, I wish I knew how to pronounce his name. He's got a ton of this stuff, like how to do this and like how to like shuffle UVs around and how to do some interesting things to materials. But I find this gradient material to be super useful in like all kinds of scenarios where, even if I just have something as simple as a cube and I stretch it out and I just want it to kind of like fade off in one direction. Like that's all I know. I have this like material that has this setting to it, and I can have it so that it fades when it goes in one direction, and all I have to do is drive it from the properties of the instance. So if I really crank this up, like I should see like it be fairly opaque on one side and kind of fade off on the other. And so this can be used for all kinds of stuff. Like I think of like particle trails or all kinds of things that we do in motion graphics all the time. Like these things can be super powerful, and obviously it just depends on what direction you want it to fade off in, right? But good stuff, and just good to kind of have these kind of tools in your toolkit. Like in truth, like this probably doesn't need to be a material in an instance. This could just be a material function, but it's good to just kind of have these things like with you. So I've already got a way to do this. I don't have to recreate these from scratch every time I do a project, because you can literally just copy this. It's just a U asset that's inside your project. You can copy it from one project to another. It will show up. So why not? Why not just have a little toolkit?
For those people who don't know, Shor DeYoung has a material masterclass in our learn.unrealengine.com. And it's a really long masterclass. It's about 3.5 hours long. But in that masterclass, he actually goes through an entire project that has, I don't know, something like 50 or 60 little mini expression networks that have little things like this that are absolutely brilliant. And if you haven't had a chance to watch that, I recommend it to everyone, because you will learn so much, where he goes through how to build procedural material, little mini expression networks like that can show you opacity and can show you how to build procedural grids and things that don't ever lose resolution or whatever the case is, where you can create a whole network of those things. So for those of you on the stream, I really encourage you to check that out, because you will learn so much about materials, and then you can create your own library of that stuff, or even harvest it from watching that stream or that class.
It's exactly kind of the thing, because I kind of know what I want most of the time now, but of course when I was first starting, I'm like I would have to Google every time, like, how do I make a gradient? And it's like, now I just copy this, these like kind of certain set of them that I know I'm going to use all the time, and then I have that with me. Same thing with like just test patterns or color. I recommend everybody have like a color chart or picker or something that what the colors look like, so that way when you're trying to play with lighting or exposure and stuff like that, like you have a frame of reference. You're like, okay, this looks off, and so take that with you and keep it in there. I do think that stuff's super useful. But you were talking about not losing resolution. Like that's why I built it this way, because I've seen a lot of people
lose resolution with the texture.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. You'll import a gradient and you'll be like, gosh, that looks kind of janky,
Yeah.
you know, and it's because it's getting compressed and doing all these things. And even if you turn all that off,
you won't lose it with math,
X
right?
number of pixels and value.
Right.
You only have 256 values of gray anyway. So
exactly.
any texture bigger than 256 for alpha just doesn't work. So you'll always
This is pure math.
These gradients. And I was going to comment that as a tech artist, the way you've done it here is probably the way I do it. Pull the red channel from the texture coordinate is. I mean, there's some other ways I could do with like object position and like.
I mean, there's literally a linear gradient like node in here, but I honestly found this to just be easier. Like it does almost the same thing, but you know, and I love how you can just open these up and you can see like, oh, okay, yeah, it basically did the same thing. So, but it's just it's so powerful, the stuff you can do in here, and it really just, you know, once you kind of dig in and kind of understand it a little bit, like. I remember the first time I looked at these, I was like, how do they know what these things are? And, you know, and if you think about it, it's just numbers. Like, it's just math at the end of the day. Like, it's a 0 to 1 number, right, in here. And I'm like, okay. So knowing that, if I multiply times something, I can kind of guess what it should do, right? And it's like, okay, if it's black, it should probably stay black no matter what. But if it's this, okay. And you can kind of start to just kind of expand on it. But, like, you know, these things don't necessarily mean anything. To you know, when you're first starting, but you'll start to kind of see the same ones crop up over and start to kind of build these things, you know, for your kind of toolkit.
But the reality is you do the same thing in 3D Studio or Maya and their material system.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that, they kind of usually a lot of people, they get these, right? You have the parameters, but like under the hood, it's the same thing. Like you will see these same things in any procedural material system. Well, one node that I found that was super helpful, if I could just like throw this in before you, it was this scale from center, right? Or or wait, how do they call it? Zoom from center, or is it scale UVs by center? Okay, this one is a super handy one, because I've noticed whenever you're kind of doing scaling of UVs, like normally it grabs it from the corner, and that's never what anybody who does art wants to do. You want to scale in from the middle, right? Like, and so I always kind of like found this to be interesting. So if I disable the gradient just so we can kind of see like what's going on, I can show you like what it does, and I was pretty happy when I saw this working. Normally, if you go to scale, like, all right, so it's going to be not give me but you know, if I set the default value to 1, like in theory I should get like exactly what it was. Like, it shouldn't be different. But if I set this to 2, what I should expect is I want it to be shrunk down, and it's going to be centered rather than be inside the edges, or sorry, scaled out. It's going to be from the center rather than from the edge, which is exactly what I want in most cases. But if I wanted it to be smaller, which is something that, you know, does happen as well, where I'm like, gosh, I just wish it was just like centered smaller. I get this tiling thing, which I was always like, gosh, why the heck does it do this? I don't like this. So this is another great case where just something simple like this clamp node fixes this, like where it's just like, okay, now what I'm going to get is it's going to be basically that small image centered in the middle of it without, you know, any of this other stuff going on, depending on what was on your edges. So it's just going to stretch whatever was on the edge pixel, right? But in the case of like something like a logo, this is going to be pretty much exactly what I want, right? So logos usually have some sort of like padding, black or alpha around them. And so now what I should get is like, you know, I should have this logo centered in the middle of it,
relevant,
smaller. And like this happens all the time that I want this. And so as soon as I found out about this,
that's worth the whole stream right there.
Thank you. Yeah, somebody, whoever showed that to me the first time, because it's like, yeah, now I can just say, okay, nope, I want it to be 75%
making
of the. Yeah, 75% of the size. I'm like, okay, there it goes. Like, that's exactly what I want, you know.
There's so much in Unreal. Like, you've shown a couple things today that's just like the rotational component. There's like I often tell people in Unreal, it's been around for so long and we use it like in production. So there's oftentimes this stuff that if you're like, I wish it had a way to take the 10 minutes to see if it actually does, and you might save yourself a day of dev time.
That's exactly what this node is. This node is somebody was like, I really need this, and they were like, why not just add it to the function library?
Absolutely. I mean, the scale UVs by center. And again, these are just material functions, so they're just made up of smaller things, right? And you can dig in and see what they did if you want. But it came up enough that somebody wrote it, right?
Yeah, some tech artist was like, if I ever have to write this again.
Yeah, they're like, I just never exactly. And so
and then it becomes a pull request on and this is important too. This might not have even come from within Epic. This is the sort of thing that from a pull request on GitHub, if you're like, I got this material function I use all the time. It's in there, you can put a pull request and we'll review it and we're like, and then you get your name as like a contributor to Unreal Engine, which is pretty wild.
That is pretty cool too. I mean, and the other one that Box Mask. Like a lot of people don't know this one exists, right? And it's like you can use this to mask out things inside the material, right? And so you just feed it like a center point and a sides, and it even has a fall off, so you can create a soft edge, which is like the holy grail for motion graphics, right? It's like, all right, I need it to just be soft
just
on the
crop
edges.
This and
and so like you could actually I made like my own basic little just like thing so that I could just kind of shrink it in, and there's actually I mean it's not
I didn't know that one. What is that?
Not quite
That's
as
so
nice.
cool.
It's not quite as nice
Mask.
as the pen tool, but there's also a sphere mask which you can circular cutouts and stuff too. So there's a lot of stuff in here if you kind of just dig into it a little bit.
That is awesome.
It may seem daunting at first, but like just these kinds of things were very, very helpful once I figured them out. And like again, I have I just know this now, but like this one, gradient one, like I just keep that material because like it happens a lot where I'm like I just want whatever little tentacle looking things to just fade off. It's like okay, great, I have that gradient material. Or I don't have to recreate it from scratch anymore.
Amazing.
Cool.
Well, you know what? There may be time for 1 or 2 questions before the magic bewitching hour of 4 o'clock Eastern time. Does anyone have a specific question? I know there's been some questions that have popped through. I think that Mark and Tom have been really good.
I've seen them answering madly. I'm so glad because I have not been reading.
Who's got a specific question for?
There was a good question here, and I'm trying to get back to it here. The question, if I'm coming from like Autodesk combustion, if I'm way back there, back in the combustion or After Effects, or like, and I haven't looked at this stuff in a while. What can I kind of jump into this? Is this something that do I need to go 4D and then learn how that was done and then move back into this, or what's your advice there for getting into this?
Getting into this, well, my best advice is to download the launcher and open it up. It sounds silly, but I think sometimes people really overanalyze like learning a new tool. Like if you open it up and you just look at it, like on the just the whole of it, like it's got a world outliner, it's got like a browser, you just kind of like drag things into it. It's not like that different from other things like on the surface, right? It has the same hotkeys to move things around. Like it's really not that different from just like a DCC, and it's in just the organization and structural hierarchy and stuff. Obviously, like this, I can see this being daunting, right? If you look at this, but just like honestly, I just ignore like probably the good bottom half of this. I never touch it.
Most of the time you just need the transform and like the first group there,
and that's okay. Groups. Yeah, I mean, what I usually recommend to people who are brand new to UE is to go to the Online Learning Center, and there's one tutorial series. It's called like Fundamentals of Real-Time Rendering by George.
We'll say that for you.
Exactly. And it will answer like so many questions about just like basic stuff about how this would work, you know, and it's kind of a long one, so maybe you don't do that first, maybe you do one on basic materials first or something like that.
He does one on materials that is great.
But there's first hour in Unreal, that's a good one. And then like, you know, that one, fundamentals of real time, because he really kind of goes into a bit of explanation on just like why deferred rendering works how it does. And if you don't even know what that is, then it's a good eye opener as to like how this stuff is done. Because like I think when he kind of showed, essentially it's just like Photoshop, like in the background doing like additive stuff over and over again. Like
he proves it in the stream.
It kind of makes you like understand like, okay, like that's where these things are happening and this and that. And like, you know, not all of it's useful if you're just doing like basic stuff, but I found it to be so just fascinating and interesting and really kind of, you know, open up a whole nother world of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I would say absolutely you can go straight into this. You don't have to go, you know, there's not really an intermediate like software that you need to know to learn Unreal. I think you can just learn it, you know, if you have 3D background, if you have 3D experience, it will seem much more, you know, familiar. But you know, if you're familiar with After Effects, just open up the sequencer, then you get this thing and you know what that looks like. So you should probably be able to figure out kind of how this works just on your own there. So.
Yeah, even a lot of the like keyboard shortcuts for like cutting and ins and outs and all of that, we've totally adopted from all the other, you know, video editing applications.
And if you want to change them, you absolutely can, right? You know, it's like keyboard shortcut, you can change every single one of them. So for me, the big one I always change is duplicate. For me, Control D is duplicate. It has been my entire life. So just change it. It's super simple. You know, and unlike some of the other settings, these persist across all of your projects.
So editor save.
There's a really good question about the CVARs and command lines. Will you show them how to bring up that HTML file?
Sure.
Do you know the one that you can get from the help menu?
Well, I'm sorry, say that again.
So if you go to help menu in your Unreal Engine and you click on the console variables, it'll actually generate an HTML file.
Yeah.
And then if you click on that, so this is all the command variables for the engine. And
you can actually search.
And you can search all of them, but you can also look at them for all the categories. So this is a really important, valuable document. And it's auto-generated by the engine. So it's not like it's got to pull it off from an online source. And this is all the command variables for the engine. And if you've got the engine installed, it will make it for you. So this is you know, when you saw Patrick go into the command line and access
turn
all
off
the
the
CVARs, they're all in here. So, you know, you can...
sometimes you just got to know the key, like the cool thing about it is like, even when you're doing it like inside of, you know, here. So the way I get to it is I hit the backtick, you know, key, right? You know, and so I get it down here, but if you go in your output log, you can do it here. But it's smart. So if you start typing, like if you're not sure what it is, just kind of guess at what you're looking for, you know, like, cause like in that case, I'm like, it's tooltip, right? Well, like, you know, all right, great. Now I got 4 choices. So, you know, I might know which one it is from there. And so a lot of these things are pretty smart. I mean, there's a ton of them.
Yeah. And if you're not sure what it does, put a question mark at the end of it and it'll tell you.
Yeah. And it'll give you,
it'll show you that same thing that's populated on that HTML.
Yeah, no, exactly. The HTML is super handy though, because like sometimes, I'm like browsing through it, see something, I'm like, oh, I wonder what that actually does, you know, and it's pretty handy actually. So yeah, that's a good one to show people, because I think that's another one that a lot of people don't know. You know, for whatever reason. A couple other things that I've seen that people don't know, like, and maybe this will just like finish this out, is like, I personally I'm not a huge fan of like all this, like, you know, like I don't really like the icons. I don't really like the spheres, because like there's tons of these, like at some point, and you just like, it gets to be too much for me. So you can actually just, if you want to get rid of the sprites, you can hide all the sprites. You don't have to see the little light bulbs everywhere. You know, and same thing with the the volume, like the spheres and stuff like that, same thing. Like if you want to turn those
the
off,
volumes
you
drive
can
me
turn
crazy.
those off. Yeah. So those are actually, if you go like I turn off the volumes too, but like the spheres were like a little bit different. I was like, oh, I wonder where that is. But that's actually in advanced, and you turn it off light radius. Then you get rid of those spheres, and that's good too. But alternatively, if you don't want to be that, this like I'm very particular about what I don't want to see. If you're just in the world and you hit G to go into game mode, like I've seen people that don't know this, it hides all the widgets and stuff. So if you just want to like take a quick screen grab, just hit G and then you can hit G again. Also, F11 quickly maximizes the window for you. I've seen so many people that, like, and there's no other way to do this as far as I'm aware that I could find. But so if you just want to get a quick one with none of your GAC, take a quick screen grab. F11 will undock and dock that for you that way.
Also, F9 takes a screen grab and doesn't take any of the widget stuff on top of it, so it hides all that junk
see that
too.
there. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these little things, and I'm just, again, like it's a large program, and sometimes there's just things. But like, here's another one that I've seen. Like, I wish there was a hotkey for that to pop into this mode. But like, it's like I've seen this too, where people are wondering, like, well, how do I cycle through the top? And I've memorized the hotkeys now. But if you wanted to look at all four of them at the same time, you absolutely could. And these all have different settings too. You could set different settings for each one. And say on this one, like I don't want to see anything other than just the meshes or whatever, and you can set all these separately. It's pretty cool stuff actually, but those are just like some quick ones that I've seen that
we should charge for this program. We should charge for it. Let's start charging for it.
Right, yeah, exactly.
There's a question here, and I'm wondering, they're asking, is there a way to use the movie render queue like from a batch file or externally currently?
Yes.
Is that currently available? I know that we were working on like Python support so that you could tie it into a workflow.
You definitely can. Yeah, you definitely can. Again, it requires a little bit of know-how. It's not going to be something you just like
right. I believe that's done like through, you need a Python script that talks to the sequence. That's what those sequencer editor tool plugin that you turned on earlier was. So
there's some of that's in there, but like if you want, there's actually some Python examples. So if you go into, it's like deep inside of it, but if you search for like the movie render pipeline, I want to say is what it's called, the folder, there's actually some Python examples of how to do some of this stuff. And that kind of always gets added to. But something else maybe that was kind of goes along with that actually in here is like you can actually specify. Oh, hold on, I don't want this thing. In here, like some variables and command line things that you want to use, like when you're rendering this thing out as well, which is really, really handy. I thought that was like pretty interesting. So if you go in here to console variables, you can add console variables to only use on the render if you want to. So if like you're like
pump up your
ray tracing is crushing your PC, but you want to turn it on for this, you can just put it in here to enable it and then kick it off when it's done.
Nice.
Really cool, really handy stuff for that. And one other thing that I think I've seen very veteran people that don't know that you can actually do this, but you can actually export like edit decision lists from this as well, right? So if you have a shots track and you go up here, you right click on it, you can import and export EDLs or XML files. So if you wanted to take this into another application, cut it, bring it back in, and then your cuts and shots are going to match up. Very, very cool stuff. I've seen a lot of people who use this, and then some people that are like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. You'll only see it on the shot track, though. So if you like right-click on other things, you won't see it, but that's how you get to that. For all you EDL Final Cut lovers out there, like, it's actually, I know a lot of people that have that workflow where they'll actually go, because like when you do that, you'd export your EDL. You would actually, in this case, you would still have to use the old one, right? And you'd have to type in your command here to render out the shots separately, but then they'll match, and you can kind of do little ninja edits and rearrange them. And then when you bring it back, then we'll rearrange the track for you here, do a final render out. So pretty cool stuff.
Wow.
Awesome.
amazing stream. Hopefully you guys got a lot out of this one. I know that I learned a bunch of stuff today. Hopefully you guys did.
Oh yeah.
We should just do this more often.
Awesome pie charts
where we just chat about things we didn't know it could do, right? It's like, yeah, it's good. That's why it's good to have other people on here too that like have different backgrounds and experiences, because I'm sure
I'm glad you said that, because we're going to have you back, buddy.
Oh yeah, well, good. I honestly would like to do some more of these and kind of just explore some of these, like, topics, and maybe do one where we kind of walk through a little bit more of the like import process perhaps, or how to do like some like Alembic geometry cache stuff.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Some questions
too.
That, and composure would be an awesome one. And
Composure is a fun one, because like that one, really, unfortunately, that's kind of an advanced topic that really gets under the hood of like Unreal. It's like, all right, how do we disable like tone mapping and color spaces and really
image warping and like, things like that?
Yeah, and really into the rendering,
and really masking, doing masking. And...
Yeah, well, like, I mean, the big one, if anybody wants to just like kind of Google this and spend some time on it, at some point, custom depth stencil is like the key to all of this. So there's 2 really good videos on tips and tricks about creating masks using depth stencils, and it will like open up your mind. You're like, oh wow, this is like, and it's really simple to do. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh great, now I can create my own render passes. Like I can do it now. And then, so if you haven't looked at it yet, and there's like a visualization mode and all that stuff, I would have to enable things and I would have to recompile, but
you also did another presentation. I'm sorry, go ahead and finish.
No, I was gonna say, just check it out. It's on the YouTube tips and tricks. There's like 2 of them on there about this. So,
but you also did another presentation for Unreal Fest Online, which was on live events. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. I'd say in that one we were talking about how to control objects like with MIDI, OSC, DMX.
Good. Yeah, because there was a question that came through about that, and clearly we are a little over time today, but maybe we can invite you back, and I think that would be an interesting topic as well. So maybe we can talk about it.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, I think especially in 426, DMX got like a big update, and I know there's also remote presets now that you'll be able to have this preset asset, and it'll generate a web page, so you can just have like a web controller for Unreal. There's a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah, all the DJs just went, oh.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, anything where you want to control it externally, that's getting a lot of love lately.
I know those are huge topics, and then the whole live event things is very much of I think a sister topic to this, in many ways. And so
absolutely, I have a whole school in the UK that specializes in live events. It's a university course, and they will be watching this with great interest.
Oh, well, good. Good.
But let's wrap up for today so that we can let Mark have his dinner. He's in the UK, probably starving over there. And thank you very much, Patrick.
Dinner.
It's been a fantastic opportunity to get to meet you and introduce you to the education community and the rest of the folks that joined us today. As usual, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Mark, and thank you all for attending. All the great guests that we have, and hopefully you guys stay safe and come back and join us. Next Friday, we have another really great stream. We've got Josh Fleming from our marketplace team, and we've got Clint Crumpler is going to join us, and we're going to talk about becoming a marketplace seller. So this is really important topic because the marketplace is Unreal Engine Marketplace is a really thriving community. If you're an instructor, and you've got some really, talented students, and they're making great stuff, whether it's blueprints, plugins, environment art content, skeletal meshes, whatever it is, they should learn to submit their stuff. I know that, when I was teaching, I would see tons of amazing content get, disappear, die on the vine. So, train them to be marketplace sellers. We know marketplace people that make their complete living selling content on the marketplace. So, we're going to have a whole stream about becoming a marketplace seller on Unreal Engine Marketplace, and hopefully that'll be informative and you guys can learn about that. Our streams are always on Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern time, so we don't always have one every single Friday, but we typically have one every Friday. And, It gets announced in the About section on Twitch here in the Unreal Engine channel. So check us out. Once again, thank you for attending, and we'll hopefully see you soon. And please come and join us next Friday. Once again, thank you all, and thank you, Patrick, Tom, and Mark. See you next time.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Good one. Thank you.
No worries.